Thank you for attending this virtual Sales Innovation Expo session. I've spent my career in sales and I've been a player, a manager, a coach, and a leader. I've learned the hard way and I've made lots of mistakes, but I'm proud to be a sales professional. And I'm passionate about developing the next generation of sales leaders to lead with integrity and character. The sales industry is in transition. This transition began way before the pandemic started, and the events of the last 16 months have only accelerated the process. There is huge emphasis and focus today on automation and on delivering results. That isn't going to change anytime soon. I'm going to share some insights on why sales leaders and businesses need to think differently about the sales department and how sales leaders must invest in themselves and their teams and stop negotiating. If you'd like to contact me, please connect with me on LinkedIn. That's Vinit Shah. Or alternatively, you can visit London School of Sales at lsos.co for more information. There are three key areas that I'll be focusing on today. Firstly, why it's important to introspectively evaluate your fallibility and help your teams to do the same. Secondly, the difference between values and behaviors and why this matters more than ever. And finally, how to motivate with purpose and impact. These softer elements are often overlooked within sales teams and not given the credence that they deserve. I'll start by giving some context and background as to why these elements are important and why you need to be thinking about them. Now, how do you feel right now? Are you, like many sales professionals that I'm speaking with, drowning with the weight of expectation? Are you worried about how the next few months are going to pan out for yourself and your family? How about your sales team? How about the results or the targets, the company objectives, and everything else that seems to have become a priority? If you're struggling in any way, then what are you doing to help yourself? And just imagine, if you're feeling that way, then how are your team members, suppliers, and colleagues within other departments feeling as well? Now, what do you prioritize to get yourself and your team to the top of that mountain? How do you empower yourself to take control of your future? How can you help those around you more? And how can you boost your chances of success? It can be easy for us to create false narratives. And those will ultimately be for yourself and your team. And it can be easy to constantly focus on just delivering results. But unless you deal with the mental barriers, you're going to struggle to engage and motivate yourself and your team. And it's not just your barriers, but the ones that your team are struggling to overcome and come to terms with as well. Now, the enemy of every salesperson is fear. It destroys confidence, it creates doubt, and it snatches the joy from life. I've witnessed amazing salespeople implode because of fear and feeling as though they couldn't talk about what they were going through. The reality is that sales and business leaders need to do more to address the stigma that is attached both with and dealing and talking about fear. And that's not just in sales. As leaders, you have experience on your side, but what are you doing to help your teams cope with the pressure and the stress that they're under? Now, not every individual is going to share with you just because you're offering that support. However, over time, if you're able to build trust and show each person that you really care, then they will talk to you in their own time and in their own way. I admit, early in my career, I operated in a robotic fashion, and I did see a lot of these elements as task-orientated, and I only focused on results because we were at work and that's what the expectation of the role was. However, my philosophy, my approach to management, to leadership completely changed through the experiences and understanding that I developed. And that was partly because of the leadership and the management that I was exposed to. I've seen two different sides of the spectrum, and I can definitely tell you that that softer approach, that people-based approach, has huge impact and it delivers great value over a sustained period of time. Now, just remember, in business, in life, in management and leadership, it's all about people. And you have that choice and that chance to make a real impact if you choose to do so. Now, the last 15 months have been extraordinary for a variety of reasons. We've been forced out of our comfort zones and we've had to change our routines, create new habits, and reevaluate ourselves deeply. As we come out of this pandemic, we have this opportunity to change the way that we operate as sales professionals, as teams, as managers, and as leaders. But will we rise to that challenge? Or will we default back to those old habits that used to bring us results and that we were ultimately comfortable with? Now, I understand that, look, delivering results, getting new logos, retaining accounts, and a whole lot more is part and parcel of our lives in sales. But we really should be using the opportunity we have to improve ourselves, our understanding, our processes, and ultimately our behavior. The sales industry hasn't had the best reputation for some time. And I collected a load of statistics prior to the pandemic, which makes for some really grim reading. In fact, they were the reason that I founded London School of Sales, because I'm absolutely focused on trying to change that perception of sales within the general business community. Now, here's a flavor of the statistics that I had actually collected. Firstly, 25% of B2B sales team members quit or are dismissed from their position each year. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I read an article on Crunchbase which suggested that this number is now closer to 35%. That's crazy. The average for most industries is about 10%. If that doesn't kind of worry you, then so many businesses fear losing their best salespeople. So what do? They promote them into management roles, team leader roles, but then they don't give them that training and that support that they need to thrive in those positions. And what typically ends up happening is that 40% of them end up leaving after 12 to 18 months. Now, these were really good salespeople, but the skills needed to be an effective manager are completely different to those needed to be a contributing salesperson. Now, again, I've seen statistics that suggest that this 40% number is today closer to 60%. That's crazy. And if those two statistics don't worry you, then this one probably is the worst of them all. 84% of sales leaders don't believe that they have the team they need to succeed. Now, these statistics are grim. They're depressing. And is it any wonder that the perception of sales is so low? Now, there is too much emphasis on process, on automation, delivering results. And don't get me wrong, all of that stuff is really important. Automation is great because in parts of the sales process, you need that to do the heavy lifting. But ultimately, people buy from people, and you still need a team that's capable, adaptable, trusted, and empowered. That's your choice. That's your role. Now, as I've said before, we have this huge opportunity to do things differently by changing our approach to how we develop ourselves and our managers and our teams. Now, I know firsthand the challenges that sales leaders and managers are faced with. I was one. I was fortunate enough to have experienced different types of management and leadership. Now, I've seen the benefit of that positive leadership, that people-based leadership approach. And of course, that pressure on hitting the numbers is always going to be there. It's not going to go away. But this is an opportune moment to change the way that we ask our teams to operate. And I don't just mean superficially. I mean, I'm talking on a behavioral basis as well. We actually really want them to do things in a different way. Now, this goes beyond actually just how we operate. It's how we set targets. It's how we set goals. It's the expectations that we have. It's the type of customers that we bring into our business for the long term. See, if we want to create this better future for ourselves, our industry, our company, and our colleagues, then we have to start by reevaluating ourselves and understanding those needs of people around us better. and creating those better environments and cultures that we want to see within the sales community, within the sales industry, and where people can ultimately thrive. Now, there's nothing wrong with growth. I just think that we have to evaluate the way that we go about getting to that growth. Just constantly focusing on that number, that's not necessarily the best way, the best approach for the business or for the individuals that we are working with and for. As sales leaders, it's our chance, it's your choice, it's your decision to make whether you carry on working in the same way that you have been or you actually take a different approach. And of course, that transition will be challenging, but you have to plan for it and you have to start somewhere. Now, if you don't buy into the behavioral argument, and believe me, because we need to change, then let's put things into perspective. £75,000 is the estimated cost on average to replace a B2B salesperson. When you factor in recruitment costs, onboarding, training, sales impact, etc., just pause and think. The steps that you have historically taken when you've had to replace someone. Now, the energy that you need to find that replacement, plug that revenue gap, motivate the team, and do all of the other things that are just expected of you. It makes both practical and economic sense to change the way that we develop ourselves and those around us. And by creating more sustainable business practices that are focused on the long term, including recruitment and retaining the customers that we want to see in our business, the customers that are right, that are the good product fit for what we sell. So how can we make this change possible? Well, for a start, you have to come to terms with and accept your fallibility, your weaknesses, your insecurities, the elements that we don't like to talk about, and maybe they scare us a little when we look at ourselves in the mirror. Now, what's holding you back? Now, only you can acknowledge that. Only you can come to terms with that. And it's easier said than done, especially because it's likely to lead to you having to make some changes, which, as we all know, can be uncomfortable. Now, for me, this process of understanding myself started when I was asked to actually complete a SWOT analysis before an interview. SWOT analysis historically is used as a business planning tool, a strategic business planning tool. But in this instance, I was asked to complete a SWOT analysis on myself and identify my strengths, my weaknesses, the opportunities I saw, and the threats that I saw in myself. The process of going through this exercise actually made me realize how liberating it was just to write things down and actually just to be completely open with myself, candid with myself, and understand what those mental barriers and blocks were that may have subconsciously been holding me back. Now, it gave me that opportunity to visualize those blocks, and it gave me an opportunity, in a sense, to talk to myself. Now, what I was able to do is when I went into that interview, I had a clear idea of what I believe I needed to do to help me get to the next level, to hit my potential. But it also provided a good opportunity to have an open conversation about some of those weaknesses. It became an opportunity to see a development plan forming for myself. Now, SWOT analysis that I just mentioned is great, but there's so many other tools similar to this that you can invest in for yourself. There are lots of self-assessments that you can do. So two that I've come across, which I think are really good, the 16 personalities test, really, really positive, and it's freakishly accurate. And another one is the 360-degree analysis. Now, you can't do this on your own. You need people around you that know you well to help you complete this, but it will give you a very good indication of your style and how you come across in both your work environment and your personal environment with your colleagues as well. So those are two that I would absolutely recommend that you try and do for yourself, because they are very, very powerful. And once you do them for yourself, it's good to actually get your teams to do something similar as well, because that experience will help them in their development too. Now, something else that I really like using is this analogy of the iceberg. And whether you like it or not, you're always going to be judged. And most people judge you or will judge you based on what they see, i.e. the tip of that iceberg, the flag, and what you've achieved. And it's that perception that people have of you. The real focus that you should have, that every sales leader should have, every individual, in fact, should have, is developing the skills and behaviors that cannot be seen. They sit below the waterline. And then it's constantly should be about reinforcing those behaviors. The elements that you can work on for yourself, just think it's about your dedication, your hard work, your good habits, the sacrifices that you make, the persistence that you have in everything that you do. How do you develop that confidence in yourself? It's all of those elements. And it's not just one thing that you will do, it's how you are constantly approaching new activities, new tasks. It's your mindset. All of those elements are what you can work on. That's what will help you develop yourself further. And it's really, really important that you work hard on depth of knowledge and understanding. It's not about being superficial, because anyone could do that. Anyone can talk the talk, but you've got to be able to walk the walk with that as well. And that process of evaluating and improving yourself, it's not easy. I've done it. It transformed my outlook, my approach, but it took time. But it's worth it, and it's really powerful, and it makes you a much better manager and leader for the long term. Now, when you understand what's holding you back, you can actually then start that process of embracing that change. It's not about blame, and it's just about accepting it, processing it, and thinking things through in terms of what can you do to change that behavior, that perception that you want for yourself, i.e. that vision that you have for yourself. Acknowledging your weaknesses, understanding them, coming to terms with them. The better you can do all of this, the easier it will be for you to step out of that comfort zone and start focusing on your continuous development, your team's continuous development. And if you don't do anything, you're going to feel stuck, and it's going to be challenging. And it might even start feeling a little bit like Groundhog Day. A friend of mine attended a talk by Sir Clive Woodward, and she shared an interesting story with me. He said in his presentation that athletes spend 99% of their time training and only 1% performing. But in business, we spend 99% of our time performing and only 1% training. It's crazy. We do this as a job, but we're not giving ourselves enough practice time, enough time to understand ourselves, test ourselves, work on ourselves, become better. We're expected to do it on the job, when sometimes we just need to take that step back and look at things and say, right, where can I have more focus, more impact? What can I develop that's actually going to help me longer term, to help my team as well? In my experience, when you're managing any kind of change, you have to involve your team. I've experienced far too many work cultures, sales cultures, where the sales leader comes up with an idea and actually wants to implement it. And I was one of them. I admit, I always used to think that, great, I've got this idea, I've got the bigger picture, let's go and implement this. But actually, I learned the hard way that that's the wrong thing to do. My team were overwhelmed with doing tasks, doing admin, doing lots of other things, other initiatives that the company, the business wanted them to complete. So I completely changed my approach. Whenever I was asked to do something by my boss at the time, I used to actually ask him a series of questions. If he couldn't answer those, then to be honest, he didn't have enough information to give to me for me to be able to pass on to my team as to why that initiative was important. A quick story is to when I did come up with these ideas, well, what I did before I implemented anything, and when you come up with an idea, you think it's great, you see the benefit of it, and you want to run and you want to go and implement it. Well, when I felt like that, rather than doing that, what I found worked for me was that I would go and speak to the person who was the complete opposite of me in my team. And I would actually tell him what I was thinking. I would tell him the idea, tell him the benefits, and why I thought that it would benefit the team. And because he was different to me, he would give me his perspective. And 9 out of 10 times, it was something that I hadn't thought of. And he would also be able to share with me the objections that he had and how he thinks or how he thought the team would perceive that initiative. And now it sounds trivial, but what it allowed me to do is, one, understand his objections, but two, it actually, in any future communication, if we implemented that idea, it meant that I'd actually thought things through. I'd taken his objections on board, and I was able to actually communicate in a more effective way with the team. And also, I also always had this barometer in terms of how overwhelmed the team were or not. So I constantly spoke to different members of my team, depending on what the initiative was or what the idea was. And it involved them in that process. That brainstorming process and getting them immersed in it was really, really valuable. Now, in sales, we're not a patient bunch. We don't like to wait. And this process that I'm talking about is going to be time consuming. It's energy sapping. And yes, it is frustrating, but it's the right thing to do. And longer term, it will deliver better outcomes. By creating that culture where change is discussed openly, you're going to help to build and nurture your team's mindset, their future success, and how they operate as well. Now, you really want that culture where teams can talk openly without judgment, because that open culture is ultimately going to lead to long-term success. Now, the only way that that's going to really happen is if you get your teams out of their comfort zone. And I guess what I'm really saying here is that we all need to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's not easy. Absolutely isn't. We're creatures of habit. And I know that not everyone in your team is going to be willing. However, that should still be the goal. And over time, those stragglers will jump on board and it will deliver long-term results. And throughout this whole process, it's about reinforcing behaviors, reinforcing the right things to do and why they matter and why they're important. Now, in my experience, too many organizations like to talk about mindset and positive change, but far too often there's this disconnect because the actions don't correlate to that behavior. It starts becoming a PR exercise. It's a tick box. And that's not what we want, because we are the front line of the business. And ultimately, we're the ones communicating with our customers. So we've got to make sure that we do things that are in line with what we believe in. Now, these ideas that I'm talking about, they are linked to our values, ultimately. And values are these ideas. And throughout your life, these ideas will evolve based on your understanding and your interpretation. See, values help you to determine your priorities, and they act as anchor points to measure and identify if life is turning out the way that you want it to. When you define and understand your values, it will help you to make those better conscious choices and decisions. I'll give you an example. If you work in a sales environment, a competitive sales environment, but you don't value competition, the likelihood that you're going to be satisfied in your job is going to be low. Now, as you move through different stages of your life, your values will evolve, they'll change. So success as a young adult could be measured by getting the university grades that you need. However, when you start working, that success measure could change to money and status. And further still, when you go into further parts of your life, it might shift from money to work-life balance, to lifestyle, or something else. See, in the same way that companies and teams often have a core set of values that are supposed to create an identity, like, for example, integrity, straightforwardness, innovation, customer focus, respect, you personally need to understand what your values are, because they're your driving force. That's what propels you forward. The difference with behaviors is that they are focused on intentions. Your behavior determines your actions. So values are ideas, behaviors are actions. Okay? When your behavior matches your values, life will seem pretty good. But when you experience those behaviors that don't quite fit in or align with your values, you're naturally not going to feel right. Just imagine when you met people that you kind of grated against. That's what it's like. Their ideas just don't resonate with you. Now, behavior is ultimately what you're going to be measured against. It's what you're going to be judged on. It's what your friends, your customers, your prospects, your suppliers, it's what they're going to remember you by. It's something that you always do. It's what you always say. It's how they ultimately remember you. And your behavior is going to shine through both consciously and subconsciously. It's not something you can fake, because actions speak louder than words or just an idea. Of course, having a strong team values are important, because that sets the direction. And as a leader, that's what you're responsible for, setting that direction. But your behavior and that of your team has to match the values that you're trying to instill in your team. I believe, as leaders, you ultimately have to have that strong set of values for yourself that you hold yourself accountable to. But most importantly, that your team can relate to and buy into as well. Not all of the values are going to be the same, but you have to find those common values in your team that can help all of you move forward together collectively as one force. And I would also say that, look, if you're going to ask your team to do anything, then make sure that you're prepared to do it yourself. Again, I know it might sound really simple, but I've been in so many environments, sales environments, where sales leaders ask their team members to do something, but they're not prepared to do it themselves. Your team have to buy into the ideas, but they'll only be committed to the ideas if the intention behind them is solid, it resonates, and you have their back ultimately, you care. Now, one of the biggest errors that a lot of sales leaders make is focusing solely on monetary motivation and linking goals to that monetary motivation. In my opinion, my belief is that you should incentivize behaviors that lead to the outcomes that support those objectives that you have and the long-term goals that you want to achieve. If you only incentivize those short-term results, then you're going to fall into the honey trap and you're going to start constantly chasing short-term goals. And that's really hard to change longer term. And of course, there's clear evidence that if you create a purposeful goal-setting habit, it only increases motivation and determination. It will transform the behavior, and over time, it will create that positive shift in mindset. It's a tough cycle to break, I get it, but you have to start somewhere. And if you've got an established process, you've got to actually start thinking about making that change now. We've been through so much change. If you don't do it now, then actually you're just going to go into that cycle again, and it will be even tougher longer term because the expectations of the workforce of people around you is changing. Now, a really good example of shifting to behavior-led goals is by focusing and adjusting your commission model. Rather than solely incentivizing on the value of the sale that comes in, start looking at other elements: contract length, touch points, client stickiness, longevity. All of these elements are really, really important. So I've covered a lot there, and really thank you for listening. And I hope that what I've shared with you has been informative, but it forces you to make a conscious choice, and you're more deliberate in the actions you take in realizing your own potential and that of your team and your managers that you support. The three key takeaways from this session that I'd like you to keep front of mind are: firstly, acknowledge your fallibility. Hiding it doesn't help. Come to terms with it and do something about it. You know what you need to change. Secondly, embrace that change and use it as an opportunity to build a better, stronger, more balanced and sustainable team that focuses on delivering long-term value. And finally, make sure your behaviors correspond to the values that are important to you. Don't ask anyone to do something that you're not prepared to do yourself. Now, don't sit on this information. The ball's in your court. Create a positive impact. Thank you for listening. And I really hope that it can have a positive influence on your behavior within your organization.